just the sheer amount of private equity capital that continues to come into the market. And there's new players coming in every month. We talk to many of them. They're looking for a large number of acquisitions. They're competing with each other. Why are they all trying to get into our market space? Well, there's a few reasons. One is there's an awakening to our industry.
Welcome to Insights as a Service. This week, I've got Peter Kujawa back with me once again. Of course, the VP at Service Leadership, which is a ConnectWise company. Peter, thanks for coming back on and talking to us.
Thanks for having me, Brendan. It was great last time. I enjoyed it a lot.
It was. That was episode 46. So rather than getting you to give me your whole backstory again and letting us know exactly why we should be listening to you with such great interest in all the reports that you've got access to, I'll let people go back, check out that episode, watch the first minute and a half and get their heads around that. Instead, what we'll do is we'll jump straight into the reports that you've got. Now, a big part of what you do is benchmarking data from across the industry, compiling it in a way that makes sense and provides value to your customers in the industry at large. I think you and I swapped an email where you were expecting the compensation report to be completed by the end of March. Have you guys actually knocked that off?
We have, yeah. Anybody who provided their data to us back in November and December got a free copy of that report last week, actually. So the full report is complete. I think it came in about 425 pages, so a little bit of late bedtime reading for you. But yeah, that's the version that went out for anybody who provided their data. The deal on that was not only did they get to provide their data and be part of the sample set, but in doing so, we expressed our appreciation for that by giving them a free copy of the report. The report is $17.99 US. For anybody else who wants to buy a copy, and that'll be available for purchase starting today. You can buy it. It'll be released to anybody who buys it April 26th.
Okay, great. I was just going to say, for a timestamp on this, we're recording this on the 18th, I think it is today, of April. So about a week from now, the 26th of April, it'll be available. Great.
Yeah, so anybody can pre-order it and they'll get it right away. And after that, of course, they can buy a copy, and they can purchase that through ConnectWise, through their ConnectWise sales rep. Okay,
great. All right, well, let's maybe start with that report. At a high level, what are some of the highlights that you think are going to be particularly relevant or of interest to the industry?
Well, there was a bunch of things that really popped off the page when we ran the data set. Number one is all of our data is industry specific. So we had a really nice turnout. About 10% of the companies that participated in the data set were from Australia, New Zealand. So we had a good data set for you local, and we'll provide a bunch of differentiated data by region. And so that in and of itself, I think, is interesting. Second is all of our data comes from the industry. Most of the time when you go out and you try to find what you need to pay for certain IT positions, it's going to be a blend of some that are in our industry, but also a lot of positions that are outside of the TSP space. So you're going to have, enterprise engineers and other positions that are sort of relevant, but sort of not. And if you're running an MSP or a VAR and you really want to know what you should be paying your people, well, the best place to start is by looking at other MSPs and VARs, because that's your main competition. So our data is 100% from the industry. The other thing that we're able to do that nobody else in the world can do is, because we collect this data, but also we collect the benchmarking data every quarter, and we benchmark the profitability of the industry. We were able to take this data, the compensation data, and we were able to correlate it to profitability. So, for example, it's not just important to understand what you should be paying on average, but what are the most profitable companies paying their people? And what are the least profitable companies paying their people? What percentage of compensation is variable? We saw a definite distinction between how the best in class, how the most profitable companies in the industry are paying their people in terms of variable, and how the bottom quartile are. A dramatic difference. sneak preview, the best in class are paying a much higher percentage of total pay tied to incentives. The
Okay.
bottom quartile and the median are paying dramatically less.
Are
So
they company? Are they tied to company performance or individual performance typically?
we don't have that in our data set, but I can tell you from past experience that typically it's both. So the best practice is for staff positions to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of compensation, total annual earnings, to variable, tied to variable. And in management positions, we want to see that up closer to 20%. And that should be a mix of company success and success within your role. So if it's a staff position, what are the things that staff position has control over? And what are the 2 or 3 things that you really want that individual to focus on? It might be customer satisfaction scores. It might be ticket flow. Might be project completion percentage rate on time. Really depends on the position. For managers, obviously, you want to look at the success of the organization, but you also want to look at the success of their team. How did their direct reports do? What you don't want to do is put a big amount of incentive out there and not have it be based on things that the employee has any control over, right? So if I'm a service desk level 1, and I have a lot of my pay tied to incentive, and 100% of that is based on company profitability or us hitting our sales goals or something like that. At that point, it's a demotivating factor. It's not a motivating factor.
Yeah.
But if done right, and we have a lot of guidance on that on Sleek, our operational maturity level tool, to help partners improve in that. Interestingly, what we saw in Australia and New Zealand was the percentage of compensation tied to incentive was about half of that in North America, but it was still much higher than what anecdotally I've been told. I often hear from partners in Australia and New Zealand that our advice on incentive tying compensation to incentives doesn't work over here. That's a uniquely American or uniquely North American concept. In reality, the data show that it's very prevalent, and that the most profitable companies are doing it at a much higher percentage rate. So it's still not at the percentage that we see it in the US, but it's much higher than what we've been told by most partners that it is.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would have said the same thing, but the data doesn't lie. And I think when it comes to those incentives, it is tricky because you can create a real divide between, well, as you said, the people who have any influence over the levers that help you get towards profitability or GP or profit per X or whatever your thing might be, your metric might be. But if you focus on CSAT as well, which might be the driver of long-term shareholder returns, it can go too far the other way as well, right? Like if you're only interested in that CSAT score, you're going to potentially spend longer on tickets, maybe provide credits where credits shouldn't be provided, whatever. So have you got any advice on how to best find those metrics across the various roles, whether you break them into, well, as you indicated, role-specific incentives? What some good examples of best practice incentives might be?
Yeah, yes, we have a lot of guidance on it. It's a topic that we spend a lot of time with, especially the peer group members. They hear a lot from us on this, and we'll hear more later this year. Yeah, generally speaking, we're fans of a balanced scorecard. No matter what the metric is that you put out there, if it is in fact something within that employee's control, any smart employee will figure out pretty quickly after a quarter or two how to game the system a little bit. And so if you exclusively base it on CSAT scores, you're right. You'll create an incentive for the employee to maybe do some things that you don't want them to always be doing. Another thing that you'll create an incentive for them to do if it's CSAT based is to coach the customer. So teach the customer on how important this is and why I need this score. And if you can't give me this score, let me know. So you see some of that behavior sometimes. But if you do a balanced scorecard and you look at 2 or 3 things that really drive success in that position, I think you're going to get a better result. Second, make sure it's something that's objective. So it should be something that you can measure, that it's not a subjective based on whether the employee is liked by the manager or disliked or some of the other things that you can come in. So something that they can see, you can really measure. You can publish stack rankings on if it's a team, and show who's doing the best and who's doing the worst in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is, our advice on incentive compensation is to structure the year in fifths. So pay 20% of the incentive each quarter and then pay 20% at the end of the year. So if you have somebody who misses a quarter, they have a chance. If they have a good year overall, but they have one down quarter, they can make up a lot of it by having a good year. So
Nice. Yeah, no, good advice. What pressure are you seeing put on? Maybe we can touch on in Australia and New Zealand, particularly New Zealand, where the hyperscalers are coming in. You've got AWS, Google, others coming on shore. Are you seeing a corresponding rise in salaries as they try and fend off those fairly wealthy and entities that are able to pay quite high salaries? Are you seeing that there's a corresponding increase across the board in salaries?
Well, we've seen it everywhere over the past couple of years, and there's a lot of different reasons why. Obviously, there's tremendous inflation worldwide, has been the last couple of years since COVID. Wage inflation for technical positions like the positions that MSPs or VARs staff, that wage inflation has outstripped general inflation for several years now. So there's different reasons why. I mean, if you look, some regions of the world, they've seen new entrants into the market like you're describing. Other regions, the work from home phenomenon really opened up the ability for somebody who might not have been able to work for a company outside of their area. All of a sudden, they can. And so that creates new wage inflation in markets. So for various reasons, it's been high and it's been prevalent in all of the regions that we benchmark worldwide. The good news is, in most of the regions, we asked about raises, and we asked what raises were paid last year, and then we asked what the planned increases were for this year. And for most of the regions that we benchmark, planned increases for this year were slightly down from what was actually paid in 2022. So we're hopeful that that's a sign that the wage inflation, while not back to where we'd like to see it, is at least maybe softening a little bit and trending in the right direction. So it's a really important thing. The reality is, if you're running an MSP today, you really have to understand the impact that wage inflation is having on your gross margin. Service gross margin moves the needle more than anything else for profitability for every MSP out there. And so the biggest input for cost of goods sold that in service gross margin is your cost to your technical team. So cost to your people to deliver services. You can't, wage inflation is real. You need to pay what you need to pay to bring in the best people and retain your people. On the other hand, you have to be disciplined, and our data shows that the best in class tend to pay less than the bottom quartile. They also tended to have lower increases last year, and they were planning lower increases this year than the bottom quartile. So discipline, know your data, and then also build an MSP that can really be built on a maximum number of level one techs. You can't afford to build an MSP where you're bringing in everybody at a top level skill set and paying them market rates and retaining them, and still be competitive for what you need to charge your customers. So there's a lot of business disciplines that go into doing that and how you staff more level ones. But you've got to make sure that you're really focused on those things if you want to be profitable at a time of high wage inflation.
Are you seeing that high wage inflation being fairly universally applied and impactful, I suppose? So the same rate across the various regions that you monitor? Is ANZ essentially seeing a higher rate or lower rate of wage inflation than you've seen in other markets?
No, we're seeing it high everywhere.
Okay.
And the data shows it's, anecdotally, if you talk to any MSP around the globe, they'll tell you what they've been feeling the last couple of years, and the data shows that what they've been feeling is really accurate. it's been a tough couple of years for that hiring, retaining employees. All the obviously the transition with hybrid work and work from home has been stressful for a lot of providers. It's also opened up opportunities for some new areas you can recruit out of and ways to staff your operation. But with all of those come a lot of challenges as well. So no, so it's definitely been a challenge across the board. The good news is in our 2022 data, what we saw was that profitability hung in there. So
Okay.
revenue growth was great. Uh, managed service growth was great. Really, really outstanding year for the industry overall. In spite of that, profitability stayed about flat. And so what that told us is that when we dove in and really carved out some nuances in the data, what we saw was that that price increases were really effectively delivered. The industry has really come a long way in the last 2, 3, 4 years with understanding how to increase pricing. So that's great news. We saw really good growth in revenue, and that's great news. Service gross margin was flat to slightly down, and so that's all wages, right? Prices are going up, and your customers are paying you more. You're selling really well, but yet your profitability is just kind of staying flat, and your service gross margin's going down a little bit. So the good news is we had all that offsetting revenue, and growth, and price increase management was better. The bad news is without that, things would have been really bad because of all the additional cost pressures on wages. So the industry needs to this year and next year just continue to stay disciplined on staffing models and make sure you understand your market, what you should be paying in your market. And if you're not doing it today, make sure that you really start instituting some effective price increases, because during normal times, it's a good business practice. During times of wage inflation, it's a matter of survival. It's really critical.
It's critical. Yeah. I think you've mentioned the term TSP a couple of times in this chat already. And I think through the conversations I have on this podcast, there is a general sense of needing to find a niche within a niche, like get really specific about what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to do that for. And that helps with the staffing piece, because you're not looking for these unicorns who can do everything. You're looking for people with specific skill sets in a specific part of the market. I guess the point of that rant is that when we talk about the evolution in pricing methodologies, are you seeing people move away from a cost plus situation to more of a, we have a specific value on offer and we're tying our price point to that? And that's sort of an evolution and a necessary evolution if you're going to essentially get away from this race to the bottom and offset that wage inflation.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Sleek, one of our traits is exactly this, and we refer to that as value-based pricing, and that is the highest OML level on a scale of 1 to 5, with OML 5 being the best. That's an OML 5. So
Okay.
OML 1 is really, you're out there trying to compete to get business. Whatever I've got to price my offering at, I'm not focused on what my cost inputs are. I'm more focused on trying to just get customers, right? And usually those are startups and folks who are just trying to figure out how to build the business. OML 2 and 3 starts to really look at OML 2 would be, what are my competitors charging in the market? And I'm going to charge what I need to charge to compete with them. The problem with that model is that in Q4, in the industry, about 30 to 35% of MSPs in our sample set lost money. So, and then you've got another 10 to 15, 20% that are flying their plane at treetop level. They're barely making anything, even though they're working really hard and adding customers, et cetera. So if you're pricing based on your competitors down the street, how do you know that competitor isn't one of those that's losing money today?
That's a great call. That's a great call. Yeah.
I used to have about 7 or 8 sales reps in my MSP, and I couldn't count the number of times that I had a sales rep escalate a deal to the sales manager and often to me saying, hey, they really want to go with us. They like us. They like our offering. everything, we get along great. They're ready to go, but they've got a quote from competitor down the street that's 30% less or 40% less. Peter, what do they know about running their business that we don't know? How can they offer this at that low a price? Well, the answer is they might not know anything. They might be a terrible operator and they're losing money today. So don't price based on what your competitors are doing. The next is to really the cost plus, as you described, to really know your inputs, figure out what gross margin you need to get, and build the deal to get that gross margin. But ultimately, where you want to get to is we've built something here. We bring a really unique value proposition to the customer. What's the value of that product to the customer, and what are we able to get for that offering? And you've got to know your cost inputs for sure, so that you can make sure you're pricing your deals at or above 51% service gross margin. But don't stop there. Don't price it at 51% just because that's best in class. If you have a really differentiated value and you can get 70% or 65%, I know a ton of MSPs that are doing that today, and they're doing really well. They're not smarter technologists or working harder or any of those things. They're just more focused on how do they get value out of what they price their offerings to be.
There's a lot to worry about there. If there's such a high percentage of MSPs or TSPs or whatever we want to call them, VARs, that are operating at or below break even, and 2022 was arguably an easier operating environment than 2023 is likely to be, you would have to assume that we're going to see a lot of businesses trading insolvent, and maybe stressed businesses that are ripe for more acquisitions or probably most likely acquisitions. So are you predicting that? Are you thinking that this year we're going to see a lot more businesses either go under or be acquired as part of that pressure?
I don't think there will be more. We've seen that pattern for several years now of a percentage of the marketplace that's doing. First of all, there's a large percentage that's doing extremely well, and their growth rates are excellent. Their profitability, our top quartile producers are which we refer to as our best in class. Our best in class last quarter averaged about 23% profitability. And those folks tend to deliver that every quarter. They're running their business in a way that we see the same customer or the same partners in our data set almost every quarter. It's about 80% of the same partners quarter in and quarter out in the best in class, because they're running their business better. They know they've made the tough decisions. They're more disciplined and they're seeing the results. So I don't want to send the message that the industry overall is in any sort of trouble or anything. There's a lot. We're in a great industry.
There's money to be made.
Yeah, the investment capital, one indicator of that, Brendan, is just the sheer amount of private equity capital that continues to come into the market. And there's new players coming in every month. We talk to many of them. They're looking for a large number of acquisitions. They're competing with each other. I talked to an industry, an M&A investment banker who is currently working with about 20 private equity funds that are all trying to put in at least $100 million into the MSP space. I talked to a private equity fund a few months back who's trying to invest 400 million minimum into the space, and they've never owned an MSP before. So why are they all trying to get into our market space? Well, there's a few reasons. One is there's an awakening to our industry that if you looked at the industry 10, 15 years ago, there was a lack of awareness of the industry outside of those who were in it. There was a lack of an understanding of what managed services even is. And today, you don't have to spend the first 15 minutes of a sales call explaining what managed services is to a client like you did 10 years ago. They know,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
The business model is really, really well known. And the private equity folks, the investment community knows that the majority of our revenue is recurring revenue. And it's very, very sticky revenue. It's very difficult revenue to displace, even if a company is struggling a little bit. And so the industry is a really, really healthy industry. We're in a great place. But if you're one of those companies and you're losing money today or barely making any money, you got to fix it. You can't run a business quarter in and quarter out that's losing money. Trust me, I took over a turnaround back 12, 13 years ago. It's a really uncomfortable place to be, and it's not fun. You're not able to invest in your business, and so you tend to have a lot of quality issues. Your retention of customers tends to be worse, pretty significantly worse in some cases. And so you can fix it. The good news is the information's out there on how to fix it, but you've got to make some decisions and start driving some change in your business today to get to that point.
Those top quartile performers, the best in class, is there some sort of a Goldilocks size? Do you see a headcount or a revenue bracket at which these companies seem to reach peak profitability, or just have that mixture of economies of scale without waste?
We don't. One of the misconceptions is that there's a correlation between size and profitability, and what we have found over the years is that there's not. There's also not a correlation between whether you're in a large metro market or a more rural area and profitability.
Okay.
There's not a correlation there. We tend to hear things a lot from partners. I go in every quarter to peer group meetings and I meet with the members, and I'm probably in front of somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 partners a quarter. And so believe me, I've heard everything in regards to this. The large guys are convinced that these small guys have an advantage because the owner is also doing sales and is also maybe doing some tickets and doing some engineering. These smaller MSPs are all convinced that the big guys have all these efficiencies by having a sales team, and that they're able to scale a lot easier. And the truth is, we have large companies that are top quartile. We have bottom quartile large companies. We have small companies that are best in class profitability, and we have plenty of small companies that are losing money today. So, and everything in between. The greater correlation is in management capability to execute and the kind of decisions that they're making. Now, no question, at different sizes, you're going to need to reorient your business and what drives efficiency and profitability. There's going to be some commonality over the course of that journey of size, but you're definitely going to have to do some things different. For example, in your sales model, when you get a lot larger.
Okay, the subject I want to jump into a little bit is AI, and this might be something you want to comment on from a personal standpoint. It might be something that ConnectWise or service leadership itself has some published opinions on. Not sure, but we've come across terms in this industry. We love talking about big data or Web 2.0, whatever it might be, and there's these terms that come and go. But then AI, I think the difference that I'm seeing is that the adoption of it in various forms has gone through the roof, and the repeat usage of it has been sustained to date, and the evolution of it is extremely rapid. And I don't want to be one of those sort of Luddites that pushes back on emerging technology because it's scary and because I don't completely understand it. But I see both opportunity and risk. Maybe if we look at the opportunity first for MSPs specifically, and I know that AI in various guises, potentially not true AI, but certainly chatbot functionality, minimizing the need for tier one human input, those sorts of things have been around for a while. Where do you see over the next 12 months, because it is extremely rapid, and I know that no one quite knows where it's all heading, but what do you personally see as the opportunity in the space? What are you hearing from the partners you're talking to about how they're looking to utilize it, or how well they understand the opportunities?
Yeah, I think the honest answer to that is everybody's trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
When I go to IT Nation events and to peer group meetings, every lunch the table you sit at or breakfast table you sit at, this is the conversation. Everybody is talking about it. Everybody's using it. Everybody's amazed by it, the capabilities. Also, there's a lot of fear in the air. There's a lot of question about what the impact will be on our business model. And I guess I would say a couple of things. Number one is efficiency is one of the best ways to control your service gross margin. And so the indications that I've seen so far is that this is going to bring tremendous efficiencies into supporting your customer base. So what's that going to do for your staffing model on level ones versus twos and threes? I think we'll have to wait and see. I think, but all indications are that this is going to move partners forward in the same way that RMM tools did once upon a time, in the same way that PSA systems did, and maybe in an even faster and more advanced way. But I think it's just another tool in the toolkit to help MSPs drive efficiency within their organization. And ConnectWise has done a good job on already integrating ChatGPT into a couple of products and really being ahead of the curve on that. And I think that'll continue to be the case. For partners, I think the one thing I would tell MSPs to think about is you're really supporting people, and you're supporting users these days much more than you're supporting specific technology. It's not like 10, 12, 15 years ago where your job was to support the server on premise or to go on site and support specific applications. Today, what costs you money to support is supporting users, right? That's the demand for our industries. People need help to make technology work for their business. And so to me, this presents yet another opportunity in that if you can become fluid in it and you can really work with your clients to help them understand how they can use this as a tool in their business to help them achieve results that'll drive business success, then you've just added value. So I think it's an opportunity to add value. The third thing I would say, Brendan, is I've been through personally, I've been in the industry since 2010. I know there's many out there listening who've been in it a lot longer than that. I've personally seen a couple of cycles where everybody was convinced that the industry was about to go out of business because of the cycle. So the first one I remember was when I joined the industry back in 2010. I remember going to my first large industry event, and it was really depressing because everybody was convinced that cloud was going to put us all out of business, that this thing, the cloud, nobody's going to need our services, that everything's going to just work. It'll all be automatic. And of course, that turned out to be ridiculous. We've been, the industry since back in 2010, 2011 has been on its best run ever. So I don't think it's going to put us out of business. We've been through a bunch of these cycles before, but it will give every MSP out there an opportunity to drive efficiency and provide more value to their clients.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The whole sort of past experience is a predictor of future behavior. It's a tough one, but I think I'll go positive and negatives. I think a positive is exactly what you've said. There's an emerging space for prompt engineers, for people to help businesses understand how to incorporate it into their business to create efficiencies, better customer experiences. And that's a whole level of consultancy and recurring revenue potentially that's there to be explored. And there is a first mover advantage if you can see the opportunity and act on it in a really compelling, well-productized way. So I think that's great. If I go glass half empty and be super grim about it, if this technology and I was speaking with Romain earlier this morning just about auto GPT and a use case where that could very easily, and arguably already is, replacing travel agents, because it can feed off its own prompts, give itself new prompts to come up with a full experience for you within a matter of seconds. Now, if you have customers who no longer need the headcount and your pricing model is based on headcount, you've suddenly got a very different equation in terms of your revenue base. If it's based on the solutions you're deploying and the value you're adding, and then maybe you're going to be okay. But it certainly changes up the assumptions we make about how we charge and the people we're working with, and potentially means that a competitor to something like Stripe could launch and with a fraction of the headcount, because there's so much of the automation available. Again, probably talking out of turn, don't quite know exactly what no one does know exactly where this is heading, but that's just a scenario.
We'll see. We're all figuring it out together.
That's it. But Yeah, I had another point there somewhere. It'll probably come back to me, but I I only think that the difference with this versus previous technologies, and again, maybe I am a bit of a Luddite, but I just think the fact that we don't understand it when we talk about cloud, we kind of knew what cloud was, right? It was taking what had been on prem, putting it somewhere that wasn't on prem, and ultimately the same functionality, but in a more of a charge as you consume type model, subscription based essentially, more of a SaaS play. This, when someone like yourself is saying to me, we don't really know, I mean, well, you've been around for a bit, you know quite a lot. That in itself, I think, makes it different.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think in the early days of cloud, there was a lot of hype about what it was going to do and how effectively it was going to do it. And don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously, the transition into cloud has been an amazing one and has had a dramatic impact on our industry. Um, but it's opened up opportunity in our industry more than it has taken away positions.
Mm.
Now, if all you knew how to do was do on-premise small business server deployments or on-prem exchange servers, or definitely you had to reorient and update your skill set if that's what you were specialized in. But that's no different than any other trend in business, and especially in technology. Smart people figure out a way to add value,
Mm.
and so our industry, I think, is going to be fine over the long haul, certainly over the next several years as everybody navigates this. What the effect will be in 10 years from this, 5 years, that's hard to say. There was a time when there was a significant number of people employed in every major city as elevator operators. Well, they're not.
It's not a
Very
thing.
don't see too many of those around anymore, Brendan. Um, so will it change? Yeah, I think it's going to have a dramatic impact on a lot of industries, a lot of positions, a lot of the positions that previously were largely off limits, such as a lot of the college educated positions, university positions that you had to go and get all of this knowledge to be able to apply it. I'm an attorney, and I went to 3 years of law school to become an attorney. And when I look at some of the things that you can gen out of Chat GPT now and have it write legal briefs and filings, and
The research
I think it's
element
going to
too,
have a
right?
dramatic impact on a lot of industries. There's no question about that, including
Totally.
ours.
Yeah, for sure. I think what you said before is a great title for an episode. Smart people find ways to add value. I think that's a good one. Um, Yeah, I guess the last thing before I move on to another question for you is just, I think about why we're not seeing cars driving themselves around the streets at the moment is because it's regulated. When it comes to transport, there's a range of regulations, and that's why we probably haven't seen mass layoffs in the transport industry with bus drivers, train drivers, chauffeurs, taxi drivers, whatever. We don't have that same sort of regulation in a services industry. In a commercial environment, you don't need to go get approval to launch a new product that could potentially replace what is a very established industry. And for me, that's one of the real outliers or differentiators in this particular wave of innovation.
Yeah, I think regulation certainly has something to do with it. I also think a lot of it has to do with the technology, um, the prospect of the technology getting a little ahead of the actual technology. If you're going to have
Mm.
a truly self-driving semi trucks and over the road, and you're going to have truly self-driving Ubers and taxis, and let alone regular passenger vehicles, the technology has to be almost perfect, because every time there's some accident, um, that it gives great ammunition to everybody who's saying we shouldn't have this. Now, the reality is, um, human operated vehicles have accidents too.
Oh, we're the worst.
And
Yeah.
Right. So whether the data is going to ultimately show one to be better than the other, I don't know. But you don't see some of the accidents with some of the anomalies that you see with some of the automated vehicles. So it'll get there. I mean, regulation or not, you're going to see a lot of semi truck drivers displaced 5-10 years from now, because you'll be able to take a truck on the road and have it auto drive itself across the country. Will it be able to drive in the city at that point? Probably not for a while. But
Yeah.
if you only needed half the drivers, you just displaced half of the drivers, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're going to see a lot of that change coming, and you're going to see it based on AI. So
Yeah, totally agree. In Australia, just that's into metro sort of transport piece. I mean, some of the roads here are so long and so straight that, it's a perfect test bed for that. But all right, let's move on away from that. M&A activity and valuation multiples for 2022, where I think there was a lot of cheap money going around still, particularly in the early part of 2022. And that was driving a pretty, and you've indicated there's a whole bunch of private equity out there going, hey, let's get involved. From what you've just told me, it doesn't sound like you expect that M&A activity to diminish going forward, despite the higher interest rates.
no, what we saw in our multiples was that the effect of interest rates, there were really two things that happened in 2022 that had a big impact on multiples. Number one was interest rate increases that started really kicking in Q2 and took the cost of borrowing from 6.5 or 7% up to 12, 11.5, 12, 12.5%.
Wow. Okay.
That had a dramatic effect. The other thing that had a dramatic effect was the stock market going down. So we heard a lot of stories from a lot of buyers who said that they started to get calls from sellers in about June or July saying, hey, that offer that you put on the table back in January or February, is that offer still available?
It's suddenly looking pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it for 5 months now. And the reason, and so those two things combined to have a couple of impacts on the multiples. First was in the second half of the year, we saw the multiples of revenue and of EBITDA be flat to slightly down. First half of the year, they were trending up, and we thought 2022 would finish as an all-time record, but in fact, it actually finished flat to slightly down from 2021. Now, that's not terrible. 2021 was all-time record multiples, so it's not like it cratered, but it didn't go up at the pace that it went up in 2021. The other impact that we saw was because of interest rates particularly, there was a much higher valuation premium for profitable MSPs who had a higher percentage profitability, and also those that had a larger bucket of profitability. So if you're a larger MSP and you're running a very profitable business, and your multiple is going to be just fine. There's tons of buyers out there looking for those types of MSPs. There's not as many of them available. And especially as you get up to certain sizes, and the private equity guys, in some cases, are looking for much larger MSPs. But if you're running an unprofitable MSP or marginally profitable MSP, or you're really small, even though you have decent percentage profitability, you're probably not going to do as well right now. It's going to be a tougher market for you for a while than it was a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of a mixed bag depending on what type of MSP you are.
Okay. Did I hear you right there that proportional profitability, at least past a certain size, drives a greater multiple on EBIT or EBITDA than perhaps a much larger, proportionately lower profitability, although nominally higher would? So you might get a 4 or 5 times, just say, sake of argument, on that larger one, but maybe 7 or 8 on the smaller, as long as it's not too small. Or did I stuff that up?
Proportional profitability is going to drive some, but the most important valuation metric is going to be, to start with anyway, is going to be size of the profitability bucket of dollars. So if, for example, if I'm an MSP that's $1 million MSP and I'm running 20% profitability, that would put me into best-in-class profitability, and I'd be at 200,000 of profitability. If compare that to an MSP who is at, let's say, I don't know, 5 million of revenue, and they're at 18% profitability. The one at 5 million is going to get a much better multiple because of the size of the bucket of, even though they're a little bit lower percentage of profitability. Sure. So at the end of the day, all of it is, when it comes to valuations, there's 10 to 15 things that really factor into valuations, but the three that I would advise any MSP on is there's a whole lot of things out in the market you can't control. You can't control interest rates. You can't control what the macro economy does. You can't control all those things. What you can control is you can control your profitability. So make sure that that your profitability is the highest percentage profitability that it can be. Make sure that you're growing and you're investing in sales and marketing, and make sure you're adding the right types of revenue. Add a higher percentage of managed service revenue than other revenue, and the managed service revenue you bring in, make sure you're pricing your deals so that they're big enough and that they're profitable enough. So if you focus on those things, if you grow your recurring revenue, especially your managed service revenue, at a faster pace than your overall growth, and you do it in a way that you're maximizing your profitability, that's what you can control, right?
Yeah.
And
that's
so all of those are going to have a positive impact on your valuation.
Yeah, but by doing all of that, you're limiting your exposure to those events that you can't control, and that's key. But I think you touched there on invest in sales and marketing. Marketing's critical because if you've got a brand that differentiates itself based on some sort of value, that's obviously going to achieve a lot of what you've just discussed. But I don't see enough MSPs still really doing that. There's a lot of people who have LinkedIn pages and will put out blogs or whatever, but there's still many of them still struggle to kind of say, this is us as distinct from all of these others. And I think there's still a real, some missing skill set there and a perception maybe that marketing dollars are less of an investment and more of a spend. And it's, I'm still trying to get my head around that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing in our industry. Most MSPs are founded by technologists, and most of them are still run by technologists. And when I talk to them about sales and marketing, generally they look at sales as some sort of voodoo or witchcraft. They don't really respect it as a real skill, and they don't really understand it, and they don't understand the quantifiable inputs that go into driving success in it. And so as a result, you see two things with sales and marketing spend in the industry. You'll see some that just don't want to put anything into it. They believe they've got to be part of every deal, and that's what got them to where they are. Well, at some point, if you want to grow your MSP and really scale it, you have to build an effective sales operation. You can't be in every appointment, and nor should you be if you're the owner. And so if your business is going to really scale to the next level, you've got to be able to have salespeople out there knocking on doors, metaphorically these days, but knocking on doors and doing customer appointments. And maybe they're bringing you in at the end or at some stage in the middle of the process, but you can't do everything. So if you try to, your MSP is going to cap out in terms of size it's going to get to. So what I tend to see is one of two things. Either the MSP doesn't believe in it, the owner doesn't believe in it, so they underinvest in it. They don't spend enough on marketing and they don't spend enough on sales. Or the opposite, where they don't get it, they just know they got to do it. And so they spend a lot of money on really expensive marketing programs, and they're not measuring their lead flow out of those. They don't know what success looks like. And so they spend a lot of money every year, and they look at it kind of like money that they have to just go outside and light on fire. They don't really know what the benefit is, but they know they've got to do it. And then sales, I see a lot of MSPs who hire salespeople, but don't really know how to manage them. They don't know how to hold them accountable. They don't know how to measure their results, to measure their activity. And so they're fairly intimidated by it. And so I see the mistake on both sides. Some of them are really committed to it and they're spending a lot of money on it, but they're not getting the results they need to get to.
Yeah. All right. I've taken up enough of your time, but is there anything in particular you'd like to let the audience know about that's either upcoming, something you're involved in?
That's a great question. We'll be doing a lot of content coming up about the compensation report. We'll have a free copy of an executive summary that'll be have some specific content in there for Australia, New Zealand, and that'll be available starting late next week. So I'd look for that. And we're going to be doing our best to, my colleague Rob Bufano and I, to get over to some of the Evolve meetings this year and continue to make a presence over in Australia and New Zealand.
Sounds great. What's the next event you've got on in this part of the world? Are you doing something here this year?
Yeah, Rob was just over there actually for Evolve a couple of months ago, and I'll be back over in August. For the Evolve meetings. So we'll be speaking to the community day, community as a whole, and I'll be going into the rooms. One of the things that Rob and I do when we go to those meetings is we go into each room for an hour and talk to the MSPs in the room and get a chance to talk about the data and show them what the latest results look like and all of that fun stuff.
Nice. All right. Well, I'll try and track you down for a coffee or a beer or something while you're here as well.
That'd be great.
Keep that in mind for August. Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, we'll see which one we kick off with. All right. Sounds good, mate. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Brendan.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Take care.